morning. Well, thanks for being here this morning. It was a treat to come in and it stopped raining and it's not too cold and it's not too windy, so I'm calling it a win today. I want to thank Matt, Jared for the invitation. Lots of familiar faces in the room. Feels like our first kind of reunion of fall conference session, so it's a treat to be here. Just a quick idea for you of what I want to cover this morning. Very informal, but do some introductions of myself and ATA, do a little show and tell of projects and process and programs, and talk about what's next. There's a lot has happened in the last 5-6 years. Just as much more will be happening. Next slide, please. I can't tell if I can see better with or without these. So. I'll make you all fuzzy, but I can read my notes. So, Alaska Telecom Association was founded in 1949 to support the phone companies that were trying to deploy voice across Alaska. And this was a process that took decades. Any of us from rural Alaska probably remember when there weren't a lot of phones. In Ecock, where I fished in the summer when I was a teenager, if you wanted to make a call, you lined up at the phone at the Winter Watchman's house. So Roger's smiling. He'd just done a lot of work in rural Alaska in those days. We have come so far since then, and these are the companies that have dedicated themselves to that advancement. Personally, I am from rural Alaska. I'm hearing a theme this morning. I was born and raised in Alaska. My dad was also a state trooper. So when I was a tyke, we lived in Southeast, then Moose Pass down on the Kenai Peninsula. And then I spent most of my life in Dillingham, Alaska, out in Bristol Bay. Still return every summer. And I got my start in telecom out in Dillingham when I was elected to the board of directors of Nushagak Cooperative. I thought, wow, this is a great thing we're doing to help our community, and it's fascinating. So that was 25 years ago, and see, one of those chance steps and where you land. ATA itself has 15 members, as you see. Probably a lot of those logos look familiar. About half of the members are cooperatives, so owned by their members, by the communities they serve. We have one municipal utility, KPU, down in Ketchikan, so they're owned by the city government. They're a department of city. Now that is a very trendy concept these days if you kind of follow broadband ideas. KPU was cool and getting it done before it got trendy, so I always love to shout them out. We're ahead of the curve on that. And we also have our very large statewide companies, ACS and GCI. So it's a broad tent, it's a lot of fun and a privilege, and I learn a lot working with these folks. ATA essentially does support, advocacy, navigating state and federal policy with our members. Next slide, please. So I like to start with kind of where did we come from? 2010, we did have voice everywhere, but we sure did not have the internet. Any of us in rural Alaska at this time or working in rural Alaska know how hard it was to be connected. And probably you couldn't be connected. We had a little bit of a microwave network being formed out in the YK there, and then of course our long-haul subsea cables headed down to where the internet lives, down in the lower 48. So next slide, please. This is as of last fall. You can see how that map has really built out. We still have a long ways to go. That's why we're all here this morning. We all know that. But it's stunning to see the extent these networks have been built out. This includes both completed networks and networks that are fully funded and in some version of permitting or being constructed. So fully funded and ready to go. As these are completed, we're actually building the ringed networks we need for redundancy. And I won't get any more technical than that because I know we have technical folks in the room and I don't want to embarrass myself by going further than saying ringed network. Also note, importantly, we have the first terrestrial route out of Alaska. Alcan 1 heading down the Richardson Highway and down through Canada to landing in Chicago or Seattle. That's our first alternative to these subsea cables. So that was a huge development by MTA, Francis LaChapelle in the back, is your guy that knows everything about Alcan 1. The other thing with this map, it's constantly changing. I need to actually update it right now. I have another project that needs to be added and I just didn't quite get that coordinated through the mapping person. So we will see this map continue to transform with the new programs and new funding that are being dedicated. Next slide, please. So one way I like to kind of distill what has happened in the difference between these two maps. Since 2017, over 80,000 individual locations in Alaska have gotten upgraded or new fixed broadband service. Over 50,000 Alaskans have gotten access to improved wireless service, 4G LTE, 5G. And over $2 billion in CapEx has been spent since 2017 by ATA members, and that's just a straight CapEx poll. What'd you spend on CapEx? What'd you spend? What'd you spend? And I added that up. Over $2 billion since 2017. So we have a lot of momentum. Next slide, please. Let's start digging in a little bit into the programs and the mechanisms that have allowed this transformation to begin. Private investment. We know it takes incredible expertise, dedication, hard work to build these networks. The commitment of Alaska's providers has been demonstrated over many decades. Like I mentioned, I got my start at Nishigat Cooperative, then I worked for MTA, all companies with decades of dedication, and we have that across the state. So we have private investment, but we also have critical federal programs that are allowing companies to deploy a lot more network a lot faster than I ever expected could happen. We have the foundational FCC programs that have been functioning for 40 years up here. We have USDA. Thank you for helping host this conference and the work you're doing here. We'll talk a lot more about USDA as we go forward. And now NTIA, relatively newer on the scene. So the question is, how is this all going to work together? How has it been working together? So let's just do, oh, and also, we have a very important state program that folks don't think about much, but it is also one of the foundational pieces that supports both connectivity in rural Alaska and affordability. It keeps those rates a bit lower. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a bit of a show and tell on some of the major projects that are closing the gaps in this map and the programs that are supporting them. So let's just start with private investment. We have OTZ's Village Connect program that they have privately financed through RUS. And OTZ is a locally owned, so native-owned cooperative in Kotzebue and the region. They're building 30 new microwave sites from the Northwest Arctic Borough to the Dalton Highway, so to get that middle mile or community-to-community link that you're able to bring the internet to your customers, your members. They are also doing something incredibly powerful, putting mobile service on every microwave tower, which generally are following similar routes to their winter trails. So this is going to expand public safety in the region through this broadband project. Also provide redundancy and improved reliability, 100 megabit per second service to everyone in the region. And construction is underway now. Next slide, please. I touched on this one already, Alcan 1, Alaska Telecom Association, another cooperative based about an hour north in Palmer-Wasilla, where I live. I'm a member. MTA several years ago said, hey, we need to get another route. We need more middle mile to serve our customers. And so they came down to the border, met Northwest Tel at the border, and have created those terrestrial links to the lower 48 that not only provide more capacity into Alaska, but provide really critical redundancy and reliability potential if we need it in Alaska. Next slide, please. And then KPU, our municipal utility. They also, you'll hear a theme, everyone needs middle mile. We need that connection to the lower 48, to where the internet lives. KPU said, boy, our subscribers continue to need more broadband, more capacity. They're streaming more, they're video conferencing more. So they issued, their voters approved a bond to finance their subsea cable down to Prince Rupert and connect into the internet and bring it to their community. Next slide, please. So let's pivot to the federal programs that are helping to support this. One you may have heard of is the Alaska Plan. That is a subset of the FCC's Universal Service High Cost Program. That's a lot. What it means is a program that supports both operating and capital expenses in high cost areas, which of course is all of Alaska. The FCC back in 2010, they were like, we're going to reform this program, we're going to make it work for everyone. All of us in Alaska know how that usually goes for us, and that is how it went for us. It was very rocky. So we worked a lot of advocacy, my member companies. We're having phone calls, we're flying to DC, as you often have to do when things are going sideways on the federal side. Worked with them to explain Alaska's needs. They made some accommodations and stabilized that program for Alaska. Created predictable, sustainable funding for a 10-year term. And because of that, something very surprising happened. They stabilized the Alaska Plan in 2017. In 2019, Natalie Kovach applied for the first round, Natalie and Jeremiah, the first round of ReConnect grants. Because we had that stability in the FCC's program, companies were able to really dive into the ReConnect program. Next slide, please. And here's the results. I think I need to match my numbers for Julia. Mine are about 6 months out of date, but massive funding going into Alaska through the ReConnect program. Grants to build major infrastructure. I would say every project here is providing both connections to individual homes and businesses and middle mile, which is foundational network that we need to continue upgrading and expanding that further. Round 5 awards are pending. I'm expecting, hoping to hear good news any day that will add to that list and increase those numbers. Next slide, please. So let's just take some quick snapshots of some of these projects. This isn't everybody, it's just a handful. Julia talked about this one, AT&T, Alaska Power and Telephone in Southeast, creating the C-Link cable linking Juneau to Prince of Wales Island. And I love this. It's the first fiber connecting Prince of Wales. So Prince of Wales is huge, scattered communities. I went to kindergarten there. But no broadband, very limited. They had some very limited because they didn't have fiber. This fiber comes in, and I just have this image of, right, the extension cords connecting, not technical, but the potential by having fiber come to the island, and they're able to then build off of that. So this technically serves 112 households, a school, 2 essential community facilities, but the numbers on all of these grants understate the importance because they're also building middle mile, which enables everything else and more connections. Next slide, please. So Alaska Power and Telephone, again, 2 more ReConnect grants with all fiber networks, Juneau to Klukwan and Skagway, so going north, 100 megabit symmetrical service, fiber to the prem. Again, this is fiber, so 100 meg today, you can do much more later as people need it. 1,236 people, 45 businesses, and a school. Next slide, please. Moving to the interior, I thought I saw Roy here earlier. Bushtel has a ReConnect grant to build a fiber and microwave network to serve 11 villages. Next slide, please. Aztec, over her table in the center back, has gotten 2, 3. They're in the ReConnect business, building these fiber connections to their communities, to their member owners. 476 people for this one, 15 business, a public school, and more important, that future-proof fiber network going forward. Next slide, please. Again with Arctic Slope, Nuiqsut to Akasuk, fiber to the prem, which I have loved seeing all of these remote ReConnect grants that are bringing fiber to the home, which if you look around the US, that's premium. We are bringing premium technology throughout Alaska here, so very exciting. 476 people, 15 businesses, and a school. Next slide, please. Moving down to Cordova, back left table. They have gotten multiple ReConnect grants and have really expanded the networks in their region. So the new internet connection for everyone in Yakutat, which grant and match a microwave network going down the coast that brings 2.6 gigabits a second once constructed, 100 meg to local fiber to the home connections. I don't have my glasses, so I'm looking at the CEOs of these companies, and you need to shake your head really loud if I'm not saying it right. Next slide, please. Another Cordova Telecom Cooperative grant, fiber to EAC and the Valdez-Cordova census area. This is a subsea fiber connecting Cordova to Seward, bringing, again, that really critical redundancy. When we think about a fiber cut anywhere, so often right now, if you have a fiber and the fiber is cut, think of Sitka this summer, you're really in a bind because you don't have that redundancy. So these fibers are bringing that redundancy to Cordova and other communities. Next slide, please. Again, Cordova. Cordova has done so well through the ReConnect program, just identifying those unserved areas that need to be served and pursuing them. Subsea fiber connecting Cordova and Juneau, again, a fiber to the premises network through the Cordova census area, including Chiniga. Next slide, please. South Central has not been left out of this party. Alaska Telecom Association got one of the early grants and has closed that out north of towards Talkeetna, between Willow and Talkeetna. But this one is to connect Tyonek. Tyonek, in a way, is so close but so far, right, across the bay from Anchorage. So MTA will be running fiber to the Prem, fiber from Wasilla up to Tyonek, and connecting all of those communities, again, with a minimum of 100 megabit service. Next slide, please. Moving to Copper Valley Telecom, again, back left corner, Josh over there. Copper Valley Telecom has a ReConnect grant to connect McCarthy. Fiber to the Prem, minimum 100 megabit speeds, 109 households. Next slide, please. And of course, this was one of the early massive grants. What an ambitious project. Aleutian Fiber with GCI got a $25 million grant and invested a lot of their own capital to bring fiber down the chain to Unalaska. And the night and day difference with being in Unalaska several years ago, before there was really much connectivity at all, your cell phone didn't really work much. You could get on the internet, but now it's fiber, so it's a lot faster. They're offering 2 gig internet speeds and fiber to the Prem network. Next slide. The IHUC network. And we'll touch on a TBCP funded, the original IHUC grant. But what is happening is these projects are starting to build off of each other and extend off earlier projects. Again, creating that network that we need for redundancy. These 2 awards leverage the first phase of IHUC. IHUC meaning a string that tells a story in Yupik. This one connects over 2,000 people in the Bethel census area. Next slide, please. Another grant to build off the IHUC project, 2 gig speeds, fiber to the premises. Next slide, please. So moving on to NTIA, the relatively new kid on the block here. So we had the FCC stabilizing their program about 2017, ReConnect coming in 2019-2020 timeframe, and then right before the infrastructure bill, we had the tribal broadband connectivity program coming with $1 billion in funding, and really leveraging off that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that the FCC set aside for tribes and native entities. We are seeing projects here again that are major connecting middle mile pieces, connecting entire regions through this program. I want to touch a little bit from ATA's perspective on the partnerships that have developed, because I think they're so powerful and they're helping this program to do more and be sustainable. The last time I counted them up, I saw $341 million in deployment grants. There was also a section of TBCP called use and adoption that you could, and planning you could use for other purposes, but the actual building chunks of network, I'm counting up at 341 last time I looked. We have a round 2 applications went in quite a while ago, so we're hoping to see those awards coming out in first quarter of next year. And that will just show us where more gaps are being filled in the network. So let's talk a little bit about the projects that are building middle mile and have partnerships. Next slide, please. So my hometown, Dillingham, they partnered, Chogyang Limited is the village corporation there, along with Kuryong Tribal Council and Nushigat Cooperative, which is the community-owned telephone and power cooperative. They worked together to identify a project to bring fiber from Levelock, and their picture of the trench going in there, and take advantage of the TBCP program's favorable provisions for tribal communities. And so that project is underway now. It's been underway. I need to check with them and see when it's going to be done, because it's not far off. So great partnership with the telco, the local co-op that knows the broadband business, and the resources, the governance, the partnership coming from Chog and Kuryong Tribal Council. Next slide, please. And another big partnership, TBCP with Doyon got a grant to serve up north there, Fort Yukon, the river, down the river to Tanana, and they are partnered with Alaska Communications for Alaska Communications to construct and operate that network. Again, just leveraging that resources with the expertise of a company with over 100 years experience in Alaska. Next slide, please. And again, another partnership, Chillista Corporation out of Bethel, partnering with Alaska Communications for 180 miles of middle mile and reaching these villages, they will be able to provide gig service. So we are waiting eagerly. Hopefully there's a middle chunk to this project. Hopefully that gets funded, and then you've got another really robust chunk creating, again, rings in Alaska. Next slide, please. Another partnership, this was the original IHUC, where Bethel Native Corporation, they knew they needed to get fiber into Bethel. Such a large community, large region, a growing region that did not have fiber connectivity. And the demands being placed on the microwave networks were just a bit overwhelming. So Bethel Native Corporation, in partnership with GCI, applied for a TBCP grant and is now constructing 400 miles of subsea fiber to bring into the region. And this leverages, remember that Chogyang, Kuryong, Nushagak project in Levelock to Dillingham fiber, bringing and I thought this was so neat. Will Cheney, the CEO, told me this about a month ago. He said, this is the first physical infrastructure that has ever touched Bristol Bay that's connected to the outside world. You've never had a physical connection come in. I thought, that is wild. That's how much we're being transformed. Better or worse, if you're from rural Alaska, you probably don't want a road to your community, but I think you do want a fiber. So that is happening. And then on the beachhead at Kanakanak, there's a fiber coming right up out of the dirt right now, and it'll be finished. But that heads out the bay, and up toward Bethel. So we're just leveraging these projects together. Next slide, please. Jared mentioned Native Village of Port Lions, also partnership with GCI to leverage off the Aleutian Fiber Network project and bring fiber into these communities, including Port Lions. Next slide, please. So that's what has been happening and is underway. We're seeing the transformation of that, but we all know that hasn't finished the job. So what's next? There's a lot more coming. BEAD. We've got $1 billion coming. Yeah, go ahead and advance the slide, thank you. And then we'll touch on those other topics too. So BEAD, Thomas Lochner will be here for a panel. Is Thomas here? He'll be here shortly for the panel. He's the director of the Alaska Broadband Office. He's got $1.017 billion to manage. So that was a great allocation for Alaska. Initially, the lower 48 consultants were kind of punditing and saying, oh, you'll get about 400 million, drop in the bucket to what we need. So through a lot of hard work with the Alaska Broadband Office, support from our federal delegation, we ended up with $1 billion, which is terrific. According to IJA, the priority of this funding is to serve unserved locations, every single one of them, and then if there's money left over, the underserved locations. Then if there's money left over, community anchor institutions. My sense is we can probably get the first two done with a variety of technologies. There probably will not be funding left over for community anchor. And the law actually says you can do use and adoption activities if there's leftover money, which we won't have leftover money. But I'm not too worried about the anchor institutions because in most cases you're going to be getting, in many, many cases, fiber is going in. Once you have fiber go in, you can serve your anchor institutions with what they need. So next steps in this program, the ABO, the Alaska Broadband Office, has been working diligently on this for almost 2 years because they have to work with NTIA to take NTIA's one-size-fits-all idea and notice of funding opportunity and adjust it for Alaska. So right now, go to their website. The draft grant program public notice is open. All the documents are posted. Next slide, please. Oh, I got my slides out of order. Anyway, there's a public notice open. Go ahead and look. All the documents are posted and review that, and you can submit comment. This just illustrates One, a really cool tool that DCRA, the Department of Community and Regional Affairs, created to show the status of every single broadband serviceable location in Alaska. So BSLs, that's everything's keyed off these BSLs, every home, residence, small business. And DCRA has put that into a map so anyone can go look at it. And if you zoom in, you can click on any one of those dots and see what their status is. If they're unserved, therefore top priority for BEAD. If they're underserved, still a priority, but the next level. The one on the left is an example up at Glacier View, about 2 hours north of here on the Glen Highway. And so you can see the scattering of purple dots are remote cabins that NTIA identified. And ABO has flagged those as kind of off-road system unserved. And then the yellow are along the road system, also unserved. On the right is Clark's Point and ECOC. You can see the dots again. If you were to click on them, they're all showing unserved. A little bit different. The colors are different because the ABO has sorted them into different proposed project areas. So in order to ensure that every location gets included in a project, they've sorted these locations into separate projects, so they're flagging them in different colors. It's a really great map to explore. I've spent quite a bit of time clicking around in it, so I can really, one, commend DCRA for their work and just recommend you go take a look at it. Next slide, please. So breaking news on Friday, I just inserted this slide because this is a big milestone. NTIA has approved the state's initial proposal. Without this approval, we can't go forward. So this is what has been, let's see, the state submitted their draft to NTIA by December 27th of last year. And it's taken that long for NTIA processing, Q&A, and back and forth and figuring things out. We finally got that approval announced on Friday. So that's a huge milestone, great news, and great work to the ABO. Next slide, please. So these are the components of the draft program. And you can see there is a lot here. Rightfully so, this is a massive program, assigning $1 billion to make sure every Alaskan is served at the end of it. So those documents are almost all posted to the website as of last night, last time I checked, and you can just review them all. And like I say, the public comment period is open on them. Next slide, please. Something to highlight when we think about, especially for this room, that folks are interested in this program, interested in expanding networks. These are the sub-grantee requirements required by NTIA's Notice of Funding Opportunity. And they're pretty extensive. You have to demonstrate how your project's going to be sustainable. And of course, expertise of your crew, whoever's going to be doing this, financial, technical, cybersecurity capability. This is relatively new in the past couple of years as our world has changed and cyber threats have increased. Everyone participating in federal funding programs has to be able to demonstrate that they can meet the standards. Supply chain risk management. Remember, IJA was coming out of the pandemic when supply chains were a mess. So you have to have a plan to manage that. You have to have a plan related to weather and climate mitigation for your project. So the list goes on: natural hazards, civil rights compliance. It's a pretty extensive. It's going to be a pretty good lift to put these applications together. Next slide, please. The other piece of IJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, is digital equity. The Digital Equity Act had been kind of moving around Congress, and it got rolled into IJA. And this, we tend to, my members, focus a lot on building networks, operating networks, although we do a lot of digital equity activities. We just don't often call them that. You know, helping people work with the internet, helping them with their devices. That is the focus of digital equity, making sure people can get connected, stay connected, and have the skills and tools they need. So this is a separate program from BEAD. It's a series of grants. The $60 million planning grants went to states to help them create a digital equity plan. $1.25 billion in competitive grants. That window just closed within the last 2 weeks. They got almost 7 times the demand for the amount of funding they have. I think we had one application come in from, well, I know of one application from Alaska. There were likely others. States will also get digital equity capacity grants, and then Native entities are also eligible for digital equity capacity grants. Next slide, please. So IJA allocated funding. IJA BEAD requires a digital equity plan from each state in order for their BEAD proposal to be accepted. So the state of Alaska designated the Rasmussen Foundation as what the NTIA called the administering entity to help create that digital equity plan. Rasmussen worked with a huge array of select entities to create this plan and get feedback. These are the major elements. Develop an initiative for broadband affordability. Launch a statewide digital literacy campaign. Create a program for device refurbishment, distribution, and maintenance, especially in rural Alaska. Ensure information and training is accessible in ways meaningful to Alaska's 8 covered populations. So digital equity has defined covered populations, rural populations, incarcerated individuals with disabilities. Can't name quite 8 off the top of my head, but folks where they want these funds and these programs focused. And then the last one is to increase support for Alaska's community anchor institutions. Next slide, please. After the digital equity plan was completed, the Rasmussen Foundation then is working with Rural CAP and has helped to form the Digital Equity Coalition of Alaska. Their website is there. Amy Hankins is their executive director. She's amazing. So she's picking up the ball along with many, many partner organizations to say, where do we go from here? We have a plan. We don't want it to just sit on the shelf and nothing happen with it. So they are working, they submitted a competitive grant proposal and they are taking this ball and running with it. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges we're going to have is workforce development. BEAD required a workforce development plan. The Alaska Broadband Office had a task force that worked to put that together, which then rolled into the Alaska Safety Alliance taking lead on the next, kind of building off that plan for the next Workforce 2030. And now Alaska's Workforce Future is kind of the final iteration in this arc of workforce development planning. I wanted to highlight for you, though, the slide on the side there. IBEW trains a lot of our telecom workers. They have a great apprenticeship program. MTA and ACS together have funded a program to help promote this and raise awareness of the IBEW's apprenticeship program. And the program pays people to take the training, get on the job training, and when they graduate, they usually will make about $90,000 a year, plus health care, paid time off, and pension. So this is a terrific program for folks looking to get into a good career, especially in this industry. And IBEW, for at least a year, over a year, since IJA passed, they've recognized that with all this funding coming into the broadband industry, there will need to be workers. So they are ready to go. They're looking for apprentices. If you know anyone that's interested, send them down there. Doug Tansey's ready. Next slide, please. Permitting. Oofty. This is always a lift. You know, that slide I showed you of OTZ's Village Connect program, all those different colors were different landowners and different agencies to have to permit with. Anyone here, all of the providers work with this day in, day out. What they tell me is, you're lucky to get a project permitted in a year. 2 is not uncommon, and it can be longer. So the challenge with BEAD will be, they start the clock ticking once you sign that grant contract, you're the sub-awardee. Clock starts ticking. You have 4 years with a possible 1-year extension, and you have to get your permitting done within that window too. That will be a challenge. I give huge kudos to Ashley Adoko over at DNR, the Office of Project Management and Permitting. They have been looking at this for almost 2 years. We talked to them immediately after IJA passed and said, here's the capital investment going into broadband, and it was a hockey stick. It was like, oh, here, this is pretty good, and then it's going to go like this. So they've been doing a lot of work preparing. We're really hopeful and optimistic that that will help. NTIA is trying to streamline federal permitting. We wish them the best. That's a big lift. They're going There's a lot of pressure, though, to make BEAD successful, and to make BEAD successful, they're going to have to streamline this permitting. The picture there is from a permitting two-day workshop, OPMP, the Office of Project Management and Permitting, held in conjunction with ATA's Broadband Showcase, so our trade show at the end of October. They had all the different agencies and gave a half hour of what their agency requires and things you should know. We are doing that again at the end of the month. It's free, open to the public, come one, come all. And this time every agency gets a full hour. It will be a mind-numbing 2 days, but really critical information and a great opportunity to access all those folks in one place. Next slide, please. And kind of the last thing to touch on is oversight. These are important federal programs. The FCC's programs, USDA, they account for this funding. You have to do a lot to demonstrate that you are being diligent, you're being responsible. The FCC's mapping, it's called the broadband data collection. The maps, the burden on creating these maps in Alaska has fallen on our broadband providers. The data the FCC started with, well, it was missing 69 villages to start with. So it's been a huge lift to get those maps as far as they are. They are not where they need to be. So if you are receiving funding, even if you're not receiving funding, if you're a broadband provider, you have to make these reports twice a year, reporting on every location where you provide service. It's resource intensive. The next one is broadband performance testing, which I'm not hearing that talked about much in light of BEAD so far. We're not there yet. But once the networks are turned up, the NTIA's NOFO requires that you test using the FCC's performance testing regime. And let me tell you, it is rigorous, it's expensive, it is every kind of bureaucratic red tape you can kind of think of. You have to, the FCC will tell you, okay, you tell me all your customers, okay, you take these 50 and you go test them. Then you have to hope that those 50 people are interested in having you test their network every quarter for 2 years. It's just a lot of hand-holding, very manual. Everyone that gets a BEAD grant will be doing this when their project is done. And, I mean, I sound like I'm complaining because I'm complaining, but it is reasonable accountability, right? We're talking about $1 billion being spent to build the broadband networks that should serve Alaskans for 50 years or longer. We want to know they're working correctly. So I'll whine a little bit and fuss about how much trouble it is, but it's important and everyone will have to do it. And then of course financial reporting goes with all of these programs. Guaranteed employment for accountants, CFOs, consultants, and so on. So next slide, please. And with that, I just wanted to touch on ATA's Broadband Showcase. Totally different format to this. It is a vendor trade show, so we've got equipment makers, consultants, engineers, designers, everybody, all the experts will be down at the Sheraton filling up the ballroom and overflowing along with that permitting workshop. It's all free, just wander through. There's swag, there's candy, there's pens. So just wanted to extend that invitation to everyone. With that, next slide. That, again, thank you so much for the invitation, Jared, Matt, wherever he went. I really appreciate being here with you all today and look forward to spending the next 2 days with you.